You got sick this morning, maybe a headache, maybe something worse, and within an hour you had options. A pharmacy on the corner, a doctor you could call, a pill you could swallow without thinking about what's in it or where it came from. You did not think about any of this. You just felt bad, and then you felt better, and then you moved on with your day. For almost all of human history, none of that existed. No hospitals, no antibiotics, no pharmacist. When something went wrong inside your body, you were alone with it. Or you were alone with the people around you and whatever they happened to know. And here's what almost nobody talks about. Some of what they knew actually worked. Not all of it, not even most of it, but enough of it that you are here right now, descended from people who survived things that, by all rights, should have killed them. This is the story of ancient medicine. It is stranger, smarter, and more unsettling than anything they taught you in school. Let's start before civilization, before writing, before cities, before any of the things we normally use to mark the beginning of history. We're talking about Neanderthals. Around 50,000 years ago, in a cave in northern Spain called El Cidrón, a Neanderthal was dealing with a dental abscess, a tooth infection. You've probably had one. You know what it feels like. Now imagine that same feeling, but it's 50,000 BC, and you have no options, and the infection will kill you if it spreads. What did they do? Scientists analyzed the hardened plaque preserved on that Neanderthal's teeth, the same calcified residue your dentist scrapes off twice a year, and found chemical compounds from yarrow and chamomile, bitter plants. Plants with essentially no nutritional value. Plants that Neanderthals, who had the same bitter taste receptors we do, would have found deeply unpleasant to eat. They consumed them anyway, in association with a documented infection. That is not foraging. That is not accident. That is a deliberate medicinal choice made 50,000 years ago by a species that we spent a century calling primitive. The earliest full medical kit we've ever found belonged to a man named Ötzi. You may have heard of him. He was found frozen in the Alps in 1991, preserved so perfectly that scientists could still tell what he'd eaten for his last few meals. He died around 3,300 BC, and he was carrying, among other things, a birch polypore fungus, a mushroom with documented antibiotic and anti-parasitic properties, along with poppy seeds, which contain natural analgesic compounds, and sphagnum moss, which functions as an antiseptic wound dressing and was still being used for exactly that purpose in field hospitals during World War I, 5,000 years later. The same moss. Ötzi wasn't just surviving. He was managing multiple documented chronic conditions with a toolkit that shows knowledge accumulated over generations. Not one person's discovery, a tradition passed down through people who watched carefully and remembered what worked. Now, the plants. This is the part that should make you stop and think for a moment, because the gap between ancient herbal medicine and the pill bottle in your bathroom cabinet is much smaller than you've been led to believe. Around 1550 BC, Egyptian physicians compiled what we now call the Ebers Papyrus, a medical text over 20 meters long, listing more than 700 remedies, among them willow leaves, prescribed for pain and inflammation. Hippocrates, the Greek physician whose name is still attached to the oath every doctor takes, recommended the same thing for fever and the pain of childbirth, writing centuries later. What neither of them knew, what nobody would understand for another 2,000 years, is why it worked. Willow contains salicylates, which the body converts to salicylic acid, which is the active compound in aspirin, which is still one of the most widely used drugs on Earth. They did not understand the mechanism. They didn't need to. They understood that it worked, and they wrote it down, and that knowledge traveled through centuries and civilizations until a German chemist at Bayer formalized it in 1897 and called it by a different name. The plant didn't change, just the packaging. But here is the part that genuinely defies easy explanation. Ancient humans did not just know plants, they cut people open. Trepanation is the surgical practice of boring or scraping a hole directly into a living person's skull. It is the oldest documented surgical operation in all of human history, and it was performed globally, in France, in Peru, in China, in North Africa, using stone tools with no anesthesia, no sterile environment, and no understanding of germ theory, and at certain archaeological sites in France, more than 70% of trepanned skulls show clear signs of healing, smooth, regrown bone around the edges of the hole, months, sometimes years of survival after the procedure. One individual had been trepanned multiple times across their life and survived each one. For comparison, survival rates for similar operations in major European hospitals in the 19th century, with metal instruments and at least some understanding of infection, were sometimes below 10%. Our ancestors, working with stone in the open air, beat 19th century hospitals by a margin that is almost impossible to explain with condescension. You cannot look at those skulls and call these people primitive. The word stops making sense. Here is the nuance that most retellings of this story leave out. Ancient medicine was not just biology. It was never just biology. The healer, the shaman, the medicine person, the physician operated at the intersection of the physical and the ritual. Illness, in almost every ancient framework, was not purely mechanical. It was also relational, social, spiritual. Something had gone wrong, not just in your body, but in your relationship to your community, your ancestors, your world. That sounds like superstition, and some of it was, but some of it wasn't. We now know that chronic stress degrades immune function, that social isolation slows healing, that placebo effects are measurable, real, and in some conditions clinically significant. The ancient healer who gathered the community around a sick person, who performed rituals that restored a sense of safety and belonging, who made the patient feel seen and cared for, that healer was doing something. It may not have been what they thought they were doing, but the body was listening. Modern medicine spent about a century trying to purge that understanding from the practice of healing. Now it's slowly, reluctantly inviting some of it back in. What ancient humans did when they got sick is something worth sitting with for a moment. They looked at the world around them with extraordinary attention. They watched and they remembered, and they passed things down. They opened skulls with stone tools and kept people alive. They identified plants that relieved pain, fought infection, reduced inflammation, plants that modern pharmacology has validated one by one over the past 2 centuries. They treated illness as a whole body, whole community event, not just a mechanical failure in a single organ. And they did all of this across hundreds of thousands of years, without universities, without journals, without the scientific method as we formally understand it. Just observation and care and time. The knowledge in your medicine cabinet did not appear suddenly. It accumulated slowly, painfully, across generations of people who got sick, tried things, and noticed what happened. The birch fungus in Ötzi's pack, the willow bark in the Egyptian scrolls, the healed skulls in the French caves, all of it pointing in the same direction. Humans have always tried to survive. Humans have always tried to help each other survive. The tools changed. The impulse never did. The ancient world has not changed. You have. You're welcome. Subscribe if you enjoyed this type of content. It means a lot.